Los Angeles had always been a city of temptation, a place where the air itself hummed with possibilities. I had lived here long enough to know that, long enough to have tasted all its flavors, danced with its dangers, and indulged in its pleasures. But nothing had ever made my heart race quite like the sight of him. It all started when I put up an ad for a tenant. My husband, bless his predictable soul, had always been a practical man. He was the kind of person who saw a spare room as an opportunity for extra income, while I saw it as an invitation for something unexpected to happen. And something unexpected did happen. He arrived on a Tuesday, a warm September afternoon, when the sun poured like honey through the blinds. His name was Malik, and he was new to the city, still finding his footing in the chaos of Los Angeles. He was young, so much younger than me, but there was something about him that made age feel like an illusion. He had the kind of presence that turned heads without even trying, the kind of quiet confidence that settled into a room like a slow, smoldering fire. His body was carved from muscle-broad shoulders tapering down to a narrow waist, his skin the color of rich mahogany. He moved with the ease of someone who knew exactly how much space he took up and wasn't afraid to own it. And that voice low, smooth, like the hum of a slow jazz record. I could feel it in my chest every time he spoke. For the first few weeks, I kept things light, careful. I watched him from a distance, listened to the deep timbre of his voice when he spoke about his plans, his dreams, the city he was still getting to know. He was polite, respectful, helpful when I needed it. And then came the night of the chandelier. One of the lights in the guest room had been flickering for weeks, and I finally decided it was time to deal with it. I asked Malik if he could help, knowing full well that my husband, ever the businessman, was too busy with his work to bother. Malik, of course, agreed. He always did. That night, as he climbed the ladder to fix the light, I stood below watching. I told myself I was just supervising, making sure he didn't fall, but my eyes had a mind of their own. His body moved like poetry, muscles tightening and shifting beneath his skin. As he reached up to adjust the fixture, his shirt was off. Of course it was. It was Los Angeles, and it was warm, and he had been working out before I asked him to help. I let my gaze wander, drinking in the way. His biceps flexed the curve of his spine, the sheen of sweat that made his skin glistened under the dim light. God, he was beautiful. I felt something stir deep inside me, something I hadn't felt in years, not just desire, though that was definitely there, but something deeper, something wilder. I didn't just want him. I wanted to own him, to make him lose control, the way I felt like I was losing mine. He must have felt my gaze, because at one point he turned his head, meeting my eyes. His lips curved into a small, knowing smirk. And for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. And then just like that, the moment was gone. He finished fixing the chandelier, climbed down, wiped his hands on his jeans, and flashed me that easy, devastating grin. All set, he said, voice smooth as whiskey. I managed to thank him, though my voice was an octave lower than usual. He nodded, stretching his arms above his head, and for a brief tortoise. Second. I imagined running my hands down his chest, tracing the lines of his muscles with my fingertips. But I didn't, not yet. That night I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, my body humming with an energy I hadn't felt in years. I knew what I wanted. The only question was, did he? Tomorrow I would find out. The next evening I stood outside Malik's door, the hallway dimly lit, my pulse quickening with anticipation. I had dressed for this moment something light, something intentional, a silk robe, the fabric barely clinging to my body, tied just enough to keep things suggestive without giving too much away. I raised my hand and knocked to pause, then footsteps when the door swung open. Malik stood there, his body relaxed, but his eyes sharp. He was wearing sweatpants and nothing else. His chest, all hard lines and smooth skin, was right in front of me, his muscles still glistening from what must have been a workout. I let my gaze linger just enough for him to notice. Hey, I said, my voice, just the right amount of casual. I was wondering if you'd like some company. I said, my tone light. He raised an eyebrow. Company. I offered a small smile, just a little conversation. His lips curved into a thoughtful expression, but he stepped aside, allowing me in. I brushed past him gently, my robe whispering against his arm. The familiar scent of his room, warm and unmistakably his, lingered in the air. It was neat, but lived in a laptop open on the desk, a pair of sneakers near the door. I turned, letting my fingers hover near the sash of my robe. I realized something earlier. I said quietly, "What's that?" His voice was steady, but there was an intensity in his gaze. "My husband's away," I said, glancing down at my robe's tie. "He's visiting family out in Redlands. Won't be back until tomorrow night." Malik's face didn't give much away, but the atmosphere in the room changed, growing heavier. I settled onto the edge of his bed, my knee lightly touching his. I guess I just started feeling a bit lonely. Slowly, I traced a small circle on his knee with one fingertip, expecting him to waver or tease me in return. But instead, he let out a low, almost knowing laugh, as though he'd anticipated this moment. And then, with a sudden and certain move, he acted. His hand caught my wrist, stilling my motions. The other slipped around my waist, drawing me in closer with clear confidence, my breath caught in my throat. I'd assumed I would be the one calling the shots, drawing out the moment at my own pace. But Malik wasn't waiting. His grip was firm. His presence overwhelmingly close warmth radiated from him, and I could feel his breath against my cheek. Then his lips found mine, and there was no uncertainty in his kiss. It was intense, driven by the kind of eagerness I hadn't been expecting. I melted against him, my fingers tangling in his short cropped hair, my body pressing against the solid heat of his. The silk of my robe slipped just enough to bare one shoulder, and his hand was there in an instant, tracing the newly exposed skin with slow, deliberate strokes. I let out a breathy sigh, arching into his touch, but he didn't rush. He took his time. His lips traced the curve of my jaw down the line of my throat, his fingers moving with the same measured confidence. My body was alight, every nerve tingling, but Malik remained in control. I had thought I was the predator. I was wrong. Malik knew exactly what he was doing, and I was completely deliciously at his mercy. The night stretched long, slow, tangled in whispers and heat, and by the time the city began to stir with the first light of dawn, I knew one thing for certain: this wasn't going to be the last time. The morning light crept through the blinds, tracing golden lines over Malik's bare back as he lay beside me, his breathing slow and even. I hadn't slept, not really. I had spent the night tangled in him, his body, his hands, his heat. I had come here thinking I would play a game, but he had rewritten the rules before I could even take my first move. He had taken control, owned me, and I wanted more. I propped myself up on one elbow, watching him tracing my fingers along the ridge of his spine. Feeling the warmth of his skin beneath my touch, he stirred slightly but didn't wake. Last night had been unlike anything I'd felt in years. Maybe ever, the way he handled me, like he knew exactly what I needed before I even did, the way he didn't hesitate, didn't second guess. I had walked into his room with the intention of teasing him, but he had seen through it. He had seen me, and now I wanted to see him again. I slipped out of bed, carefully tying my robe loosely around me. My body ached in the best possible way, a dull throb of satisfaction mixed with the sharp hunger for more. I glanced back at Malik, his face relaxed in sleep, his lips slightly parted. God, he was beautiful. I padded down the hallway toward my own bedroom, slipping inside just as the city outside began to hum to life. The apartment was still in quiet, the air thick with the remnants of last night. I stepped into the bathroom, turning on the shower, letting the steam rise. As I studied my reflection, my skin glowed, my lips were slightly swollen, my hair deliciously tousled. I looked different. I felt different as the water rushed over me. I let my mind replay every moment, every touch, every sound. A slow, satisfied smile curled my lips. I wasn't done with him yet. The day passed in a haze of anticipation. I busied myself with small, meaningless tasks, checking emails, rearranging bookshelves, anything to keep my hands occupied. But my mind was elsewhere. By evening, I couldn't wait any longer. I stood outside Malik's door again, this time not even pretending to hesitate. I knocked my fingers tightening around the belt of my robe, my pulse steady but eager. This time he answered almost immediately. The moment he saw me, something flickered in his gaze. Amusement, recognition, hunger. He didn't say a word, just stepped aside and let me in the door close behind me. And just like that, we picked up right where we left off. No small talk, no pretense, just hands, mouths, skin. He lifted me with ease, carrying me to the bed as if I weighed nothing, his body pressing me down into the mattress, his heat overwhelming. I gasped, arching against him, and he smiled against my throat, his grip firm, possessive. I wasn't used to this. I was used to control, to being the one who set the pace, who dictated how things would go. But with Malik, I didn't have to think, I didn't have to plan. I just had to feel, and God did. I feel. The night stretched long again, filled with breathless laughter, teasing touches, whispered names, and by the time I collapsed against him, utterly spent. I knew there was no going back. I had crossed a line, and I had no intention of stopping the next night. I didn't wait for an excuse. I didn't even pretend to fight it. I knocked on Malik's door again, but this time I wasn't playing coy the moment he opened it, standing there in nothing but those damned sweatpants. I stepped inside without a word, pressing my palm flat against his chest. As I walked him backward into the room, his muscles tensed slightly beneath my touch, but his expression remained unreadable. A small smirk playing at the edge of his lips couldn't stay away. "Huh," he said quietly. I didn't reply. Words seemed unnecessary. Instead, I loosened the knot on my robe, letting it slip from my shoulders and float to the floor. Malik's eyes deepened with sudden intensity, and I caught the sharp intake of his breath just before he stepped forward, hands settling firmly on my waist. There was something exhilarating about how effortlessly he guided me with such a simple touch. He took his time, his fingers tracing, my hips sliding upward light enough to send a rush of warmth through my entire body. I let out a quiet gasp as he lifted me so easily, as if I weighed nothing, pressing me gently against the door, my legs wrapped around his waist, the cool surface of the wood meeting my back while his body radiated heat. Against me, leaning in my lips, brushed his ear. "You like me? Like this?" His low laugh rumbled against my skin. "You know I do." He kissed me then, starting slow and deliberate but quickly turning more insistent. Each breath shared as my fingers dug into his shoulders, grasping the solid strength beneath them. There was a clear sense of possession in the way he held me, and I found myself relishing every moment of it. He carried me to the bed, placing me down with careful control before settling beside me. The night felt like an unspoken rhythm, sometimes tender, sometimes urgent, shifting between playful teasing and undeniable intensity. I had never experienced anything that felt so completely consuming when we finally collapsed, breathless and entwined in the sheets. I realized this wasn't some fleeting misstep. It felt more like an irresistible pull, something I couldn't easily turn away from. I woke to the soft patter of rain against the window, a rare sound in Los Angeles. Soreness lingered in my muscles, a reminder of the night's intensity. But when I turned to look for Malik, I found his spot empty. I sat up, clutching the sheets, a slight frown on my face. Then I heard it, the steady rush of water from the shower. I smiled to myself, stretching my body, still humming from the night before. I had never stayed like this before, never lingered in the aftermath. Usually I slipped away before the morning light could make things feel too real, but this was different. I ran my fingers over the sheets, still warm from where he had been, my heart beating a little too fast. A part of me knew I was already in too deep, but I didn't care, not yet, not when every part of me was still craving him. The sound of the shower running was like a low hum in the background, steady and soothing. But my mind was anything but calm. I leaned back against the pillows, the scent of him still clinging to the sheets, my body aching in the best possible way I should have left. That was always the rule. Keep things fun, keep things physical, and never ever let it become more. But I didn't move. Instead, I closed my eyes, letting my fingers trail over the spot where he had been just minutes before. My skin still warm from his touch, then the water shut off. A moment later, the bathroom door swung open and Malik stepped out. A towel slung low around his hips, steam curling around him like something out of a dream. His skin was damp, glistening droplets sliding down the ridges of his abs. I swallowed hard, gripping the sheets, a little tighter. He smirked when he saw me still in bed. Didn't expect you to stick around. I arched an eyebrow, feigning, casual. I was comfortable. He walked toward me. His movement, slow, deliberate. That right. I nodded, but my breath caught when he reached out running, his fingers along, my bare thigh, his touch light, teasing. Thought you'd be gone before I woke up, he murmured. I tilted my chin up, pretending I wasn't already melting at his touch. Why would I leave? His smirk widened. Because you don't seem like the type to stay. I exhaled a soft laugh. He wasn't wrong, but I didn't answer. Instead, I let my fingers slip beneath the towel at his waist, tugging it free, letting it fall to the floor. His eyes darkened instantly, and in the next second he was on me again, pressing me into the mattress, his body warm and firm against mine. And just like that, we were lost in each other again. The days blurred together. After that, I stopped pretending this was a one-time thing. I stopped pretending I had any control at all. Every night I found myself back in Malik's room, tangled in his sheets, his name a whisper on my lips. I craved him, the way he moved, the way he touched me like he already knew every secret my body had to offer, the way he looked at me like he didn't care, that I was older, that I was married, that this should have never happened in the first place. I told myself it was just an escape, that it didn't mean anything. But every time he pulled me against him, his lips found mine. Every time I lost myself in him, I knew I was lying. I wasn't just addicted to his body. I was falling, and I had no idea how to stop. One evening, as I slipped out of his bed, wrapping myself in my robe, Malik propped himself up on one elbow, watching me with that lazy, knowing smirk. You know you don't have to keep sneaking out, he said. I turned to face him, tying the belt of my robe a little tighter. I'm not sneaking, he chuckled. Then stay. I hesitated. It was the first time he had asked me to stay, really stay, and God help me. I wanted to, but I knew better. I shook my head, forcing a small smile. You don't understand. He sat up, running a hand over his jaw, his eyes locked onto mine. Then explain it to me. I hesitated for a long moment, my heart pounding, my body still humming from his touch. And then, before I could stop myself, the words slipped out. I think I'm in love with you. The room went still. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, something I couldn't read. Then slowly he sat back, exhaling a long breath. Say that again. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. I had never planned to say it out loud, but now there was no taking it back. I was in love with Malik, and the truth had finally caught up with